My name is Sarah Mitchell, and in a single night, I lost my billionaire fiancé, my fortune, my reputation, and nearly my life in Seattle. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital with complete amnesia, accused of crimes I didn't commit, betrayed by the people closest to me. But during those 3 lost days, something happened to me. Something no one expected, something that gave me the power to destroy every person involved in the conspiracy that ruined my existence. What they didn't know is that by trying to erase me completely, they transformed me into the worst threat they could ever face. This is the story of my perfect revenge. Before continuing, tell us in the comments where you are watching from, your city, your state, and at the end of this story, don't forget to rate all of this from 0 to 10, because I guarantee you've never heard anything like what I'm about to tell you now. I start by describing the perfect life I had built at 28 in Seattle, working as the marketing director for Chambers Real Estate, my fiancé David's family company, earning a 6-figure salary, living in a penthouse overlooking Puget Sound, driving a black Tesla Model S that David gave me for my birthday. I talk about how I met David 3 years earlier at a business conference in San Francisco, how he was different from other rich heirs, genuinely interested in social causes, in building affordable housing, in using the family fortune to make a real difference. I describe our intense relationship, trips to Aspen, dinners at exclusive Portland restaurants, weekends at his beach house in Malibu, and how he proposed to me atop the Space Needle during the most beautiful sunset I had ever seen, with a 5-carat diamond ring that looked like a star on my finger. I mention my best friend Jessica Torres, whom I met at the University of Washington, and who was by my side for every important moment, and my younger sister Amanda Mitchell, whom I always admired and protected since our parents died in a car accident when I was 18. I set the scene of the wedding rehearsal at the luxurious Fairmont Olympic Hotel, describing the elaborate details, the imported white flowers, the high society guests of Seattle, the powerful executives, the local celebrities, all there to celebrate our union, which was scheduled for the next day. I describe how radiant I was that night, wearing a pearl white Vera Wang dress, my hair in perfect curls, impeccable makeup, surrounded by everything I had ever dreamed of. Then I begin to plant the seeds of the twist, mentioning small, strange details I noticed but ignored at the time. Jessica whispering something to Amanda in the corner of the ballroom, David repeatedly stepping out to take urgent calls, the Chambers family lawyer, Robert Martinez, watching me with a look I couldn't decipher, cold and calculating. I describe how after the speeches and toasts, David asked me to go up to the presidential suite to talk privately about something important before the big day. How I went up excitedly, thinking it would be some last-minute romantic surprise. I recount that when I opened the suite door, I found Jessica and Amanda already inside, which I thought was strange but assumed was part of some surprise. But the expression on their faces was not one of celebration. It was something much darker. David entered behind me and locked the door. And that's when I realized there were other people in the suite. Robert Martinez was there, and 2 men I had never seen before, dressed in black, with an intimidating appearance. I described the moment David turned to me with a smile completely different from the man I knew, an empty, cruel smile, and said we needed to settle some matters regarding documents I had signed in recent months related to the company. I mentioned my total confusion while Jessica, my best friend of 10 years, avoided my gaze, and Amanda, my own sister, seemed almost bored with the whole situation. Robert opened a folder full of papers and started showing me contracts, bank transfers, corporate agreements, all bearing my signature, authorizing multi-million-dollar movements, approving questionable mergers, documents that could incriminate me in money laundering schemes and corporate fraud. But I had never, absolutely never seen those papers before in my life. I described my growing despair, trying to explain that it was a mistake, that I never signed any of that. But David just laughed and said that of course I signed. They had my fingerprints, my handwriting, witnesses who saw me signing, security cameras registering everything. That's when I understood I was being framed, that this was an elaborate trap set up months, maybe years ago. I recount that I tried to run to the door, but the men in black blocked me. And when I screamed for help, Jessica finally spoke, her voice cold as ice, saying that I always had everything too easy, always the pretty one, the smart one, the successful one, while she lived in my shadow. Amanda then spoke up, saying she was tired of being the little sister I pitied and supported, that she deserved our parents' fortune, which I left entirely to myself when I took guardianship of her. David explained coldly that the marriage was never real, that he needed someone outside the family to sign compromising documents that would shield the Chambers from federal investigations that were coming, that I was the perfect fall guy, the naive, lovesick fool who would do anything for love. I describe how Robert handed me a drink, saying it would be better for me to drink it to calm my nerves while I signed a few more final documents, and stupid and desperate as I was, thinking there might be some way to resolve it. To prove my innocence, I drank it. The last moments I remember of that night are fragmented and confused, the room spinning, voices distorted, Jessica taking my phone and laughing while typing something, Amanda taking pictures of me, David saying something about me being found in very compromising circumstances, and then everything went black, completely black, as if I had been erased from existence. I wake up describing the feeling of floating in absolute void, without any sense of time, space, or identity. Just a throbbing pain in my head and a horrible metallic taste in my mouth. Slowly, sounds begin to penetrate the darkness, rhythmic beeping of machines, muffled voices, the unmistakable hospital smell of disinfectant and sickness. I recount that when I finally managed to open my eyes, I found aggressive fluorescent lights on the ceiling, sterile white walls, and a nurse who immediately called a doctor upon realizing I had regained consciousness. Dr. Richard Foster, a man in his 50s with a serious expression, informed me that I was at Harborview Medical Center in Seattle, that I was found 3 days ago unconscious in a cheap motel room in Tacoma, intoxicated by a dangerous mixture of alcohol and drugs, and that I was very lucky to be alive because my vital signs nearly stopped twice. I describe my total confusion, insisting I don't use drugs, that I should be at my wedding, desperately asking where David was, why no one from my family was there. The doctor's expression changed, becoming uncomfortable, and he said there were police officers wanting to speak to me as soon as I woke up, that there were serious issues involving my situation. Before I could process this, 2 detectives entered the room, Detective James Morrison and Detective Linda Chen, both with that rigid posture of people who have already decided you are guilty. Morrison asked if I remembered the last 3 days, and when I replied that I didn't, that my last memory was the wedding rehearsal, he exchanged a meaningful look with Chen. They began showing me evidence on their tablet, photos of me completely unrecognizable, drunk in seedy bars in dangerous areas of Seattle, videos of me violently arguing with people on dark streets, bank transaction records showing that I transferred all my money, over $2 million from my joint account with David, to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Chen showed me posts on my social media, horrible texts I supposedly wrote, confessing a secret affair with David's senior partner, Marcus Wellington, revealing corruption schemes at Chambers Real Estate, accusing David of abuse and manipulation, all written in what looked like my style but which never ever left my mind or fingers. Morrison then dropped the final bombshell, informing me that David Chambers filed a police report against me for physical assault, presenting photos of himself with bruises and a black eye, alleging that I had a psychotic break on the night of the rehearsal, violently attacked him, stole confidential company documents, and fled. The Chambers family was suing for defamation, breach of contract, theft of intellectual property, and the FBI was investigating the illegal money transfers I apparently carried out. I describe my absolute desperation trying to explain that none of it was true, that I was drugged, that it was a conspiracy, but the more I spoke, the more I noticed in their eyes the disbelief that police officers have when they think they are dealing with a lying criminal. Chen said that they found a cocktail of drugs in the motel room where I was found, including GHB and methamphetamine, along with nearly $50,000 in cash and falsified documents with different identities of mine. When I asked to call Jessica or Amanda, Morrison informed me that both had given statements asserting that I had been exhibiting erratic behavior for months, intense jealousy fits, paranoia, substance abuse, and that they tried to help me but I refused any treatment. I recount that it was at that moment I truly understood the magnitude of what they had done to me. They didn't just betray and rob me, but they constructed a complete and convincing narrative that I was unstable, criminal, dangerous, and they did it with such precision that even the authorities believed it. The detectives informed me that as soon as I was discharged from the hospital, I would be formally charged and would need to appear before a judge, and that it would be best to cooperate completely if I wanted any chance of reducing my sentence. After they left, I lay there alone in the hospital bed, connected to IVs and monitors, looking at the ceiling and trying to process how my perfect life had turned into a Kafkaesque nightmare in a matter of days. I picked up the remote and turned on the small television in the corner of the room, and immediately saw myself on the screen, my photo next to David in happier days, while a King 5 news reporter told the story of the bride who went mad days before the wedding, attacked her billionaire fiancé, fled with millions, and was found in deplorable conditions after a drug binge. They had turned me into the perfect villain, the envious, unstable woman who couldn't handle the pressure of marrying a rich and powerful man. The social media that I managed to access on the cell phone, the nurse returned to me, exploded with hatred against me. Thousands of comments calling me a gold digger, a psychopath, a criminal, wishing me to rot in prison. Every person I knew, co-workers, acquaintances, even people who barely knew me, posted about how they always knew there was something wrong with me, how it always seemed like I was too good to be true. David gave an emotional interview saying he still loved me despite everything, that he wanted me to get psychological help, that he hoped justice would be served, but that he forgave my violence because I clearly wasn't in my normal mental state, the perfect performance of the wounded, generous fiancé. Jessica posted a long text about the pain of discovering her best friend was a compulsive liar, and Amanda gave an interview crying about how she tried to protect her older sister, but failed. I was completely alone, without money, without a lawyer, without a single ally, facing federal criminal charges, publicly destroyed, and with absolutely no real memory of what happened during those 3 crucial days that could prove my innocence or confirm my guilt. I spent the next 2 days in the hospital, obsessively trying to recover any fragment of those 3 lost days, but my mind was an absolute void after drinking what Robert gave me in the suite. Dr. Foster explained that the combination of drugs in my system could have caused severe anterograde amnesia, meaning that even if I was technically awake and functioning during those days, my brain did not form retrievable memories. A hospital social worker, Margaret Sullivan, came to visit me, and with genuine concern, unlike everyone else, she told me my case seemed strangely too elaborate, that in her 20 years working with overdose and substance abuse victims, she had never seen anyone with my profile, with no prior history, appear in the condition I presented. She whispered that off the record she thought I might have been the victim of something much more sinister, but that without proof or memories, it would be impossible to prove. Margaret connected me with a public defender, Thomas Park, an overworked Korean-American man with hundreds of cases who met with me quickly to explain the gravity of my legal situation. Tom was direct. He said the evidence against me was absurdly solid. Videos, photos, digital records, witnesses, financial transactions, and that the best-case scenario would be to negotiate a plea deal to reduce the sentence from a possible 15 years to perhaps 5 with good behavior. When I insisted on my innocence, he sighed wearily, said that all his clients say that, but that I needed to be realistic about my chances in a trial against the unlimited resources of the Chambers family. I was discharged on the 3rd day, and since I had absolutely nowhere to go, Margaret found a temporary space for me in a women's shelter in downtown Seattle, a dark, old building called Hope Harbor, where I would share a tiny room with 3 other women. I described the humiliation of carrying my few belongings the police returned. Dirty clothes I didn't even remember wearing, that cell phone that was now only a source of hate messages, and walking through the streets of Seattle where I had built my life, now recognized by strangers who pointed and whispered. At the shelter, I met women with devastating stories, recovering addicts, domestic violence victims, chronic homeless, and I realized I was now part of that invisible world I used to pass by without noticing. Lying on the uncomfortable bunk bed at night, I started having strange flashes, not exactly memories, but fragmented sensations of the lost days, a feeling of being in very different places, voices I didn't recognize, moments of terrifying lucidity where I realized I wasn't controlling my own body but couldn't react. I had one specific, very intense flash of being in some kind of laboratory or clinic, cold lights, medical equipment, someone injecting something into my arm while I tried to scream but no sound came out. I woke up sweating and confused, and realized that perhaps there was much more to this story than a simple conspiracy to frame me. Perhaps they did something to me during those days, something that went beyond just drugging me and fabricating evidence. I started investigating obsessively on the public computer at the shelter's library, researching drugs that cause amnesia, memory manipulation techniques, cases of people framed through elaborate digital evidence forgery. That's when I found an obscure forum on the deep web about victims of corporate conspiracy, and saw reports frighteningly similar to mine. People who lost days of memory, woke up framed for complex crimes, socially destroyed by fabricated narratives, and in many cases involving powerful families or corporations looking to protect secrets. An anonymous user who identified themselves as exec whistleblower posted that large corporations sometimes use private security firms specializing in psychological operations to eliminate threats, creating perfect scapegoats through a combination of experimental drugs, digital evidence manipulation, and total narrative control. The post mentioned a specific company, Blackthorn Solutions, based in Portland but operating nationally, which supposedly offered this type of service to ultra-wealthy clients. I researched Blackthorn and found only a generic corporate website about security consulting, but in the buried comments of some obscure journalistic investigation articles, there were whispers about their true nature. I realized that if David and the Chambers truly hired something like this, I was dealing with forces far beyond the personal conspiracy I imagined. I was facing professionals trained in destroying lives without leaving a trace. But then, I had a realization that changed everything. If they used such sophisticated techniques on me, if they really took me places and did things during those lost days, then there should be some record, some flaw in their perfect plan, some physical evidence I hadn't yet discovered. I began examining my own body methodically in the shelter's communal shower when the other women were asleep, and that's when I found it. A small injection mark on the inside of my left elbow, almost imperceptible but definitely recent, and another one behind my left ear, hidden by my hair, as if something had been implanted and then removed. My heart raced with a mixture of terror and something unexpected, hope, because if physical marks existed, it meant that real evidence existed, and if evidence existed, it meant that maybe, just maybe, there was a way to prove the truth and destroy those who did this to me. I became obsessed with those injection marks and the fragmented flashes that began appearing more frequently, especially during that state between sleep and wakefulness where the mind becomes vulnerable. I decided to do something risky. I used the last $20 Margaret gave me for expenses and took a bus to a free medical clinic in Tacoma, the same area where I was supposedly found, hoping that doctors there could examine the marks and perhaps identify what was injected into me. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a Japanese-American volunteer doctor who worked at the clinic on Saturdays, examined the marks with unusual attention, and her expression grew progressively more concerned. She said the mark on the elbow looked like a standard intravenous injection, but the position behind the ear was extremely unusual and consistent with neurological procedures or temporary subcutaneous implants. Yuki asked if I had authorized any medical procedure recently, and when I told her my complete story, expecting disbelief, she surprisingly didn't seem skeptical. She revealed that a few months earlier, she treated another patient, a tech executive from Bellevue named Karen Rodriguez, with frighteningly similar symptoms: days of lost memory, unexplained injection marks, a life destroyed by false accusations, and Karen also mentioned having flashes of being in an unknown clinic or laboratory. Yuki said Karen was trying to investigate what happened to her, but after a few weeks, she simply disappeared, never returned to the clinic, and Yuki couldn't contact her anymore. That gave me chills, but also confirmed that I wasn't alone, that there was a pattern, a systematic operation happening. Yuki collected blood samples from me, saying she could test for unusual substances through contacts she had at research labs at the University of Washington, but that results would take a few weeks. I returned to the shelter with this information burning in my mind, and that night, I had the most intense and clear flash yet. I saw myself lying on a gurney in a sterile white room, people in surgical masks surrounding me, sophisticated medical equipment, and a male voice with a European, perhaps German, accent saying something about temporary neural implant protocol for biometric data extraction and programmed behavioral pattern insertion, as if I were a computer being hacked. I woke up screaming, and the other women in the room were startled, but one of them, a 60-year-old African-American woman named Dorothy Williams, who had been at the shelter for months, approached me and said she believed me because she herself had a similar story 30 years ago. She was a scapegoat in a corporate scandal and never managed to clear her name, but she learned to survive in the shadows. Dorothy became an unlikely ally, teaching me how to navigate the social assistance system, how to get free meals, how to avoid trouble on the streets, skills I never imagined needing. Meanwhile, my preliminary court hearing was fast approaching, and Tom, my public defender, called me, saying that prosecutors offered a plea deal. If I pleaded guilty to corporate fraud and illegal fund transfer, I would get 7 years in federal prison with the possibility of parole in 5. But if I went to trial and lost, I would face potentially 20 years or more. He strongly pressured me to accept the deal, saying it was the rational choice, that juries love to convict women who try to take down rich and powerful men. I said I needed more time, that I had new evidence emerging, and he laughed with disbelief, saying that evidence doesn't magically appear. But then something impossible happened that completely changed my situation. A week after visiting Dr. Yuki, I was at the public library trying to research more about Blackthorn Solutions when I felt a sudden, sharp pain behind my left ear, exactly where that injection mark was. The pain was so intense that I fell out of the chair, and when I regained consciousness minutes later, I was on the floor surrounded by worried librarians calling an ambulance. But something was different. Fundamentally different. Because I started hearing things I shouldn't hear. Whispered conversations across the room as if they were being amplified directly into my brain. And when I looked at the computer screens around me, I could somehow read the text even from impossible angles, as if my visual perception had expanded absurdly. I refused the ambulance, saying I was fine, just an anxiety attack, and ran back to the shelter completely terrified but also strangely excited about what was happening. In the room, I discreetly tested these new perceptions. I could hear Dorothy's conversations downstairs with crystal clarity. I could read documents on the administrator's desk through the half-open door 5 meters away, and when I focused on specific sounds, I could isolate and amplify them, like adjusting the volume of individual channels. I spent the entire night experimenting and realizing that whatever they implanted in me during those lost days, some experimental neural technology, was starting to malfunction in ways they clearly didn't intend, maybe because it was removed prematurely, or maybe my body reacted differently than expected. For the first time since I woke up in that hospital, I felt something other than despair and victimization. I felt power. I felt that perhaps they had unintentionally given me the exact tool I would need to destroy them, if I could understand and control what was happening to me. It was absurd, impossible. It sounded like something out of a science fiction movie. But it was undeniably real, and I realized I needed help from someone who understood neurotechnology and neural implants to find out exactly what was happening in my brain and how to use it to my advantage. I researched obsessively about neurotechnology and companies working with brain-computer interfaces and found Dr. Marcus Chen, a brilliant neuroscientist who was fired from Elon Musk's Neuralink for denouncing unethical experiments and now ran a small independent neural research lab in Oakland, California, financed by donations and academic grants. In scientific forums, Marcus was known for investigating secret military and corporate applications of neurotechnology, and had published controversial articles about neural implants used for behavioral manipulation and information extraction. I used the library computer to send a detailed email to Marcus describing my situation, the lost days, the injection marks, the impossible symptoms I was experiencing, expecting him to think I was some delirious lunatic. To my surprise, he responded in less than 2 hours, saying my case was the 4th similar report he had received in the last 6 months, all involving successful professional women who were destroyed after periods of amnesia, and who subsequently developed abnormal perceptual capabilities. Marcus said he was building a theory that there is a black market for experimental neurotechnology being used by private security corporations for control and threat disposal operations, but that he didn't have concrete proof yet. He offered to examine me for free if I could get to Oakland, and said that if his suspicions were correct, I might have physical evidence in my nervous system that would prove the entire conspiracy. The problem was that I didn't have money for a bus ticket to California. I was under travel restriction due to the pending criminal charges, and Tom warned me that leaving Washington State could result in an immediate arrest warrant. But I knew this was my only real chance to understand what they did to me and potentially have real proof, so I made the risky decision to flee. Dorothy helped me by offering money she had saved, $53 she had economized from donations, and gave me the contact for an informal network of women who help other women in desperate situations, a kind of modern underground railroad. Through this network, I managed to get a ride with a trucker named Ruth Martinez, who ran a Seattle to San Francisco route and agreed to take me to Oakland without asking questions. The 16-hour trip was tense. Every time we saw police on the road, my heart raced, thinking they had discovered my escape. But Ruth kept calm, talking about her own story of escaping an abusive relationship years ago, and how sometimes women need to break unjust rules to survive. We arrived in Oakland at dawn, and Ruth dropped me off at the address Marcus had sent, an old industrial building converted into a lab in the West Oakland district. Marcus Chen was younger than I expected. Early 30s, messy hair, deep circles under his eyes from working through the night. But his eyes had that intensity of someone genuinely obsessed with uncovering truths. He took me to his lab, filled with neurological equipment, scanners, computers running complex analyses, and explained that we would need to run a series of tests to map my neural activity and identify any residual technology or modifications to my nervous system. For 6 hours, I was subjected to high-resolution MRIs, detailed EEGs, extensive sensory tests, and Marcus became progressively more excited and disturbed by the results. Finally, he showed me the images on the screen, pointing to abnormal patterns in my temporal and occipital regions. Structures that shouldn't be there, microscopic but definitely artificial, suggesting that nanotechnology had been introduced into my brain, and even after the removal of the main device, elements remained integrated into my neurons. Marcus explained that what I had was essentially an unauthorized distributed neural implant, technology he estimated to be at least 15 years ahead of what is publicly known, capable of intercepting and amplifying sensory signals, potentially recording memories and experiences, and even influencing behaviors through targeted neural stimulation. He said that during those 3 lost days, I was likely kept in a sedated state while they completely mapped my brain, extracted information about everything I knew about Chambers real estate, and programmed specific behaviors that would make me act exactly as they needed for the perfect trap. The hasty removal of the main device was likely because they needed me to wake up on time for the narrative they constructed, but they left the nanometric components because they thought they would be undetectable. What they didn't expect was that these components would start functioning autonomously without the central control, giving me augmented perceptual capabilities without the behavioral control part. Marcus was scientifically ecstatic, saying I was the first person he knew with verifiable physical evidence of this technology in illegal use, and that this could blow open the entire black market of neurotechnology if we could expose it. But then, the practical reality hit. Marcus asked if anyone knew I was there, and when I mentioned that there was probably a warrant out for my arrest for violating travel restrictions, he became concerned that we might have limited time. We decided we needed to document everything immediately, create copies of the scans, the tests, the analyses, and distribute them to multiple secure locations before I was eventually captured. We spent 2 more days in the lab working frantically while Marcus taught me about the implants, how the nano components in my brain functioned, and surprisingly, how I could potentially learn to control them consciously with practice and biofeedback. He connected me to a neurofeedback system where I could visualize my own brain activity in real time, and through focused meditation and intense concentration, I began learning to amplify or reduce my sensory perceptions at will, like adjusting the volume and zoom controls of my own consciousness. It was mentally and physically exhausting but incredibly powerful, and for the first time, I started seeing myself not as a victim, but as someone with a unique advantage, someone who knew my enemy's secrets, but they didn't know what happened to me. With the scientific evidence documented and secure backups created, Marcus and I developed a plan that seemed insane, but was my only real option. Instead of trying to fight in conventional court where the Chambers had infinite resources, I would use my new capabilities to infiltrate their world, collect first-hand evidence of the conspiracy, and expose everything at once so publicly and irrefutably that even their money couldn't silence it. Marcus connected me with Elena Volkov, a former Russian intelligence hacker who now worked as an independent security consultant, helping whistleblowers and victims of illegal corporate operations. Elena operated from a secret apartment in San Francisco, full of servers and surveillance equipment. A mysterious woman in her 40s who smoked incessantly and spoke with a heavy accent. When I showed Elena my perceptual capabilities, she was impressed, saying I was essentially an undetectable human surveillance device, and that with adequate training, I could infiltrate places no conventional technology could. Elena spent a week training me intensively in espionage techniques, how to memorize information quickly, how to behave so as not to arouse suspicion, how to use my augmented perceptions to find hidden documents, recordings, and digital evidence that people thought were secure. She taught me how to read lips from a distance using my amplified vision, how to isolate specific conversations in noisy environments using my enhanced hearing, and even how to feel subtle vibrations that might indicate secret compartments or hidden electronic devices. During this training, Elena also investigated Blackthorn Solutions deeply and discovered alarming connections. The company was indeed a facade for paramilitary and psychological operations, founded by former CIA operatives and financed by a consortium of ultra-wealthy families and corporations that needed discreet solutions for problems the law could not solve legally or quickly. The Chambers were longtime clients of Blackthorn, having used their services on at least 5 previous occasions in the last 10 years to eliminate competitive threats, silence whistleblowers, and cover up scandals. Elena found encrypted records suggesting that Robert Martinez, the Chambers family lawyer, was the main contact with Blackthorn and likely orchestrated my entire destruction. With this information, we created an elaborate plan. I would return to Seattle not as a desperate fugitive, but disguised and prepared. I would infiltrate events and places where the Seattle elite circulate, use my perceptions to collect compromising evidence directly from those involved, and simultaneously, Elena would hack the digital systems of the Chambers and Blackthorn to extract documents, emails, and recordings that corroborated what I discovered physically. The goal was to create a dossier so comprehensive and shocking that when we released it to the media and federal authorities, it would initiate investigations that even the Chambers could not stop. Elena provided me with fake identity documents, the name Michelle Porter from Portland, a fabricated history as a public relations consultant, and credit cards in the false name linked to offshore accounts that could not be traced back to me. She also gave me special contact lenses that could record video and transmit it to secure servers, and a small device implantable in my tooth that could constantly record audio. Marcus gave me experimental neurological supplements that would help keep my perceptual capabilities stable during periods of stress, and warned me that extensive use could have unknown side effects, since no human before had nanocomponents functioning autonomously for so long. I returned to Seattle in mid-March, 6 weeks after waking up in the hospital, completely transformed physically and mentally. I had cut and dyed my hair from long blonde to short brown, wore non-prescription glasses, discreet professional clothes, and carried a confidence that victims normally do not have. I rented a small apartment on Capitol Hill, using the false identity, and began executing the plan. The first target was Jessica Torres, my ex-best friend who betrayed me. I discovered through her social media that she frequented an expensive yoga boutique in Bellevue every Tuesday and Thursday. I showed up there as Michelle, a new client, and through casual conversations in the locker room while pretending to change clothes, I used my amplified hearing to listen to Jessica talking on the phone with Amanda about how the payment they received from the Chambers for testifying against me was running out faster than they expected. I recorded everything through the device in my tooth. Then, I went after Robert Martinez. I discovered he frequently ate lunch at the Metropolitan Grill in downtown Seattle, a place frequented by the legal and business elite. I managed to get a table nearby using my false identity, and during lunch, I used my amplified vision to read documents he was casually reviewing while eating, including printed emails discussing Operation Sarah successfully completed, and mentioning a payment of $1.2 million to Blackthorn Solutions. I photographed everything mentally with perfect detail, and then reproduced it from memory for Elena, who transformed it into reconstructed documents. The riskiest move was David. I discovered he would give a speech at a charity event at the Four Seasons Hotel Seattle, supporting an affordable housing program. The irony of the situation did not escape me. I bought a ticket using the false identity, and during the event, I circulated among the elite, listening to conversations, collecting information. When David took the stage, giving his rehearsed speech about social responsibility, I used my perceptions to observe his micro-expressions, the moments where the mask slipped and the true cynic appeared, and I recorded everything. After the event, I discreetly followed Robert and David as they left together, keeping my distance but using my hearing to catch their conversation in the parking lot, where they casually discussed how they needed to use the same Sarah method on a problematic executive from a rival company who was threatening to expose the chamber's illegal practices. That conversation alone was pure gold. A direct admission of criminal conspiracy and intent to repeat it. For 3 intense weeks, I executed dozens of these operations, infiltrating different locations, collecting fragmented evidence that together built a devastating case, while Elena simultaneously hacked systems and extracted terabytes of compromising data. As I collected more evidence, I realized there were even deeper layers to this conspiracy. It wasn't just about destroying me. I was a piece of a much larger puzzle involving international money laundering, political corruption schemes, and even connections to influence peddling in federal contracts that the chambers obtained through systematic bribery. My destruction was necessary because, as marketing director, I had access to communications and documents that could eventually expose everything if a federal investigation started and I were interrogated. They needed not only to remove me, but to discredit me so completely that even if I spoke, no one would believe me. Elena discovered that Blackthorn Solutions had secret facilities in several cities, including one in Tacoma, which was likely where they took me during the lost days, located in an abandoned industrial complex near the port. We decided we needed physical evidence from that location to connect all the dots, so we planned the riskiest infiltration yet. We obtained blueprints of the site through old public records and identified possible entry points. One night in late March, Elena, myself, and an ally of hers, an ex-Navy SEAL named Jackson Rivers who worked as private security but had moral objections to illegal operations, went to the Tacoma complex. The place was terrifying at night. Dilapidated buildings, virtually no lighting. But through my amplified perceptions, I detected sophisticated hidden security systems, thermal cameras, motion sensors, much more protection than any abandoned facility should have. Jackson used jamming equipment to create temporary blind spots as we infiltrated, and my auditory perceptions detected security patrols long before they got close, allowing us to avoid detection. We found an entrance to subterranean levels that didn't appear on official blueprints, and descending, we found what we were looking for. But it was more disturbing than I expected. A complete medical facility, including surgical rooms, state-of-the-art neurological equipment, and offices full of documents and data drives. Elena began copying everything frantically, while Jackson stood guard, and I used my perceptions to quickly read through physical files. I found records not just about me, but about dozens of other victims over the years, men and women who had been subjected to the same protocol. Some survived like me. Others had fatal complications that were covered up as suicides or accidental overdose. The scale of the operation was nauseating, and I realized this went far beyond personal revenge. I was uncovering a systematic criminal operation that destroyed countless lives. That's when I made a critical error. I found a specific room that was locked with advanced biometric security, and my curiosity overcame my caution. Jackson managed to bypass the system, but this apparently triggered a silent alarm that we didn't detect. Inside the room was a complete file on the neural implant program, technical protocols, nanotech suppliers, and surprisingly, footage of my own surgeries during those 3 lost days. Seeing myself sedated on the gurney while technicians worked on my brain was traumatizing, but it also validated everything I suspected. Elena quickly copied everything, but then Jackson warned that he detected multiple security teams converging on our location. We had minutes to get out. The escape was chaotic. The Blackthorn tactical teams were trained professionals, but Jackson was better, and my perceptions gave us an advantage, allowing us to anticipate their movement. We managed to get out of the complex, but during a car chase through the industrial streets of Tacoma, we were shot at. Jackson was hit in the shoulder but kept driving, and I used my auditory perceptions to track the pursuing vehicles and orient our escape route. We eventually lost them, but we knew that Blackthorn now knew someone infiltrated the facility and stole sensitive data. They would soon connect the dots and realize that I, Sarah Mitchell, supposedly destroyed and subjugated, was alive and fighting. We needed to drastically accelerate our plan before they tried to eliminate me permanently. Elena worked 48 hours straight, organizing all the evidence, creating a comprehensive dossier with a clear narrative, documentary proof, videos, audio, financial records, everything categorized and verifiable. Marcus scientifically validated the data on the neural technology, confirming its authenticity. We decided that the moment of exposure had to be maximum impact, so we planned for Seattle's most important annual charity event, the Emerald City Gala, which would take place at the Washington State Convention Center in 2 weeks. The event would gather the business, political, and media elite. Everyone important would be there, including David Chambers, who was one of the main sponsors. The plan was for me to appear publicly there, not as a fugitive but as a survivor armed with the truth, present the evidence live to hundreds of witnesses, including journalists, and simultaneously Elena would release everything online to dozens of media outlets and federal authorities, making it impossible to cover up. It was risky because it would expose me completely, but it would also be my only chance to definitively turn the table. I spent those 2 weeks preparing mentally, practicing control of my perception, rehearsing the speech I would give, and also, for the first time since everything began, allowing myself to feel the accumulated rage, the desire for vengeance that I had been suppressing to focus on survival. Now, I let those emotions surface, because I would need that energy for the final confrontation. The night of the Emerald City Gala arrived, and I was strangely calm. Elena equipped me with hidden live streaming devices that broadcast to multiple platforms. Marcus monitored my neural signals remotely to ensure stress didn't cause the implants to overload, and Jackson, though still recovering from his injury, was nearby as backup in case Blackthorn attempted something violent. I entered the convention center using my true name for the first time in weeks, Sarah Mitchell, wearing an elegant black gown that Elena provided, my hair professionally styled, makeup flawless, looking exactly like the successful woman I was before everything fell apart. The irony was that many people present recognized my face from the news as the crazy bride who attacked David Chambers, but they didn't immediately associate me because the context was completely wrong. A wanted fugitive shouldn't be calmly walking into a high society event. I saw David across the room talking with politicians and executives, his smile charming and confident, completely unaware of the hurricane that was about to hit him. Jessica was there too, stunning in an expensive red dress, likely bought with the money she received for betraying me. And Amanda was with her, both laughing and drinking expensive champagne. Robert Martinez was near the stage talking with the mayor of Seattle. The event proceeded with the charity auction and speeches, and I waited patiently for my moment. I used my perceptions to monitor conversations around me, and that's when I heard something interesting. 2 men I recognized from photos as senior Blackthorn Solutions operatives were near the exit, discussing containment protocol and mentioning my name, confirming they knew I was there and were preparing an intervention. I needed to act fast before they made their move. I approached the event coordinator, a man named Richard Paulson whom I knew from when I worked at Chambers, and said I had an important announcement related to David Chambers that he would want made before the close. I used all my confidence and charm, and Richard, confused but recognizing who I was, agreed, thinking it might be a public reconciliation or something. When the moment arrived, and Richard announced that Sarah Mitchell had words to share, the entire ballroom fell into shocked silence. Hundreds of faces turned simultaneously to see me walking onto the stage, the confusion palpable in the air. I saw David's expression change from confidence to absolute horror as he processed that I was there, standing on the stage of Seattle's biggest social event, live in front of the city's entire elite and with cameras rolling. I started speaking calmly, thanking them for the opportunity to speak, and then told my story, not as a tearful victim, but as a warrior survivor presenting verifiable facts. I described the night of the wedding rehearsal, how I was drugged and framed, the 3 lost days where I was subjected to illegal medical experimentation, How I woke up in a fabricated nightmare where my entire life was destroyed through an elaborate conspiracy involving David Chambers, his family, Blackthorn Solutions, my own sister, and my best friend. As I spoke, Elena simultaneously released the evidence online. The event monitors were hacked, showing documents, photos, videos, the financial records proving payments from the Chambers to Blackthorn, the footage from the Tacoma facility showing illegal medical equipment, and even the recordings of my own unauthorized surgery. I watched people in the ballroom pulling out cell phones, seeing everything confirmed in real time. Major Seattle journalists present starting to broadcast live, the story spreading virally within minutes. David tried to run from the ballroom, but Jackson and 2 allies he hired blocked the exit. Robert Martinez tried to shout that it was all defamation, but his voice was swallowed by the growing commotion. I showed the scientific evidence of the neural implants provided by Marcus, explained how illegal technology was used not just on me, but on dozens of victims over the years. And then I made the final move. I called Jessica and Amanda to the stage by name, publicly exposing their betrayal with evidence of recordings where they discussed the payments they received. I saw their expressions go from shock to terror as they realized everything was over, their reputations permanently destroyed just as they tried to do to mine. Federal agents whom Elena had previously alerted entered the event, FBI and federal prosecutors armed with the evidence we had provided hours earlier, starting to make arrests. David Chambers was publicly handcuffed while cameras captured everything. Robert Martinez tried to negotiate immunity immediately, and Blackthorn operatives tried to escape but were contained. The room exploded into complete chaos, but I remained on the stage, calm and victorious, watching years of torment avenged in a single spectacular night. I finished my speech by looking directly at the cameras, saying that my story was proof that no matter how powerful your enemies are, no matter how completely they try to destroy you, truth and justice can prevail if you fight with intelligence and never give up. I encouraged other victims of similar operations to come forward, because now there was a precedent and protection. In the following months, the legal process was a tsunami. David Chambers and his family faced multiple federal charges, including conspiracy, fraud, assault, illegal medical experimentation, and money laundering. Juries were formed, the evidence we collected was admitted, and eventually heavy convictions were handed down. David received 23 years in federal prison without the possibility of early parole, Robert Martinez 17 years, and Blackthorn Solutions was completely dismantled, with the principal executives receiving similar sentences. Jessica and Amanda were charged as accomplices, and each received 7 years, losing everything they gained with the betrayal money. Marcus Chen received international recognition for exposing the black market of neurotechnology, his research validated and properly funded now, working with authorities to identify other victims. Elena continued her work in the shadows, helping other whistleblowers, but now with a legendary reputation. As for me, I sued the Chambers estate for damages and won $37 million in compensation. I used part of that money to create a foundation helping victims of corporate conspiracy and illegal private security operations, funding investigations, providing legal resources, and connecting survivors. The nano implants in my brain remain. Marcus determined that removal would be more dangerous than leaving them, so I learned to live with the augmented perceptions, controlling them better over time, even finding ways to use these unique capabilities to help others, occasionally working with authorities on complex cases where my unique skills could make a difference. I rebuilt my life, not by trying to go back to what it was before, but by creating something completely new and more meaningful. I discovered that losing everything can paradoxically be liberating. It forces you to rebuild based on who you really are versus who you think you should be. I learned that revenge, when executed not as emotional destruction, but as a methodical pursuit of justice, can be an act of healing, not just for me, but for all the victims who came before and would come after. Today, a few years after the night that changed, I have a peace I never imagined possible, not because life returned to normal, but because I found a deeper purpose born directly from the trauma I survived. So that is my story, of how I lost absolutely everything, but gained the perfect weapon for my revenge, not just against my specific enemies, but against an entire system that allows the powerful to destroy the lives of ordinary people with impunity, and how I used that weapon not just for my personal satisfaction, but to fundamentally change how such crimes are exposed and prosecuted. Now I want to hear from you. Rate this story from 0 to 10 in the comments. Tell me what you thought. If you know similar cases, if this story resonated with your own experiences of injustice or betrayal, subscribe to the channel, because I will continue sharing stories of people who faced the impossible and prevailed. And leave your like if you believe that no one, no matter how powerful, is above justice when truth and determination. Thank you for listening to my journey from the end to the beginning, from destruction to perfect revenge.